All right, everyone. Good evening, and welcome to tonight's Morris-Jumel virtual parlor chat. Every third Wednesday of the month, we endeavor to hold this series whereby we invite experts to come and speak on topics that are related to Morris-Jumel Mansion, the neighborhood of Washington Heights, and their history. And tonight, we are very fortunate to have licensed New York City tour guide and feminist historian here, Leigh Hallingby, who will very shortly take us on a virtual walking tour of Harlem, highlighting the contributions of women some of us may be familiar with already, and some women who are lesser known, but also led amazing lives and contributed to the city and to American history. So my name is Megan Burns, and I'm the programs manager at Morris-Jumel Mansion. And I'm just going to briefly go over how tonight's program is going to run and give you a little context in case some of you out there may not be familiar with Morris-Jumel Mansion and our location in Washington Heights and its connection tonight. So, let me advance my slide, great. So those of you who are joining us on the Zoom webinar, we want to let you know that tonight this event is being recorded. Your video and audio is automatically turned off when you enter this space. However, if you choose to remain in this space, and particularly if you contribute to the question and answer period or type in the chat, you will be on the recording. So if you choose to remain here with us, you're granting your consent for this. And for tonight, we are going to take your questions and comments via the Q&A. If you have a question for either Leigh or myself, please share your thoughts in the Q&A. And if you are having technical difficulties, either with sound or other things of that nature, please feel free to use the chat. I, in a moment, will introduce Leigh. We will pause about midway through her presentation to address some questions. And then we are going to ensure that at 7:50, we are going to open it up for a larger audience question and answer period. So, and I always start a lot of our programs with an ask. If you are able to make a small contribution this evening, it really helps us at our non-for-profit to continue to offer quality programs such as this, as well as virtual school field trips, family days, and other things with little to no cost to our community and learners everywhere. So if, again, you are able to do so this evening, we invite you to make a gift today by texting MJM to 44321 or by clicking the link morrisjumel.org/donate. And feel a little bit like PBS, our NPR that recently did a drive like this, but like them, we too have a raffle of prizes whereby if you donate $20 or more, you will be entered into a raffle to win women's history themed and Morris-Jumel Mansion themed merchandise. So again, if you want to participate in this, you have time until March 24th when we announce the winners. I also would like to share a couple of upcoming events at the mansion. On April 10th, we have our monthly bilingual mansion and garden orientation outside in Roger Morris Park, followed by a self-guided tour of the house, and that is at 11 a.m. And then next month, we are excited to have local artist Felipe Galindo Fego, who will be talking about his Statue of Liberty inspired illustrations. And then we are also hosting an exhibition in partnership with New York City Veteran Services called Veterans Voices. And this will be on display at the house through April 15th. Okay, so now that we've covered some of those housekeeping measures, just a brief word about the house and how it connects with Leigh's tour of a feminist look at women's history in Harlem. So you can see on the left is a picture of Morris-Jumel Mansion today. It is the oldest remaining house in Manhattan and was built in 1765. So as you can imagine, there's a lot of history and a lot of stories and narratives that we share at the site. But one of the things that we've endeavored to do more recently is expand some of the stories that we tell based on geography and the history of place. So whether that involves discussions of the Native people who were forcibly removed from this area, namely the Lenape and the Wappinger nations, through to events that have transpired within the estimated boundary lines of the original Morris property, named after the family who had the house built, most likely using enslaved and hired day laborers. If you look closely at the map, based on documents and research, we estimate the original Morris land holdings to stretch from approximately 140th to 180th Streets, from the Hudson River to the Harlem River. So that is a huge swath of Upper Manhattan. And we are using that to take some of our research and our storytelling in a new direction. And within this, of course, we always endeavor to share the stories of women. And briefly, there are 3 women tonight that I would like to share to frame Leigh's conversation. The first is Eliza Bowen Jumel, shown here on the left. She's the grande dame of the mansion and was the longest living resident, dying in 1865. Recently, we are uncovering research to tell more of the story of the relationship between Eliza and the second woman, Anne Hampton Northup. Northup may sound familiar to some of you out there. Anne was married to Solomon Northup, whose memoir was 12 Years a Slave, and the movie itself was based on that. After Solomon was captured and forcibly sold into slavery, Anne and her children met Eliza Jumel. Eliza hired Anne to come to the city to work as her cook, and Anne brought their 3 children with them in 1841. So we believe that Eliza may have helped Anne in her search and eventual repatriation of Solomon, but we're continuing to study that story. And then recently, speaking to the need for all of us to gather together to share stories of women, both well-known and lesser known, a friend of the mansion named Priscilla recently reached out to us and shared the story of Regina Anderson Andrews. And she was quite a remarkable person. Regina was, in fact, the very first African-American woman to be the supervisor of a branch of the New York Public Library in 1938. Eventually coming to the Washington Heights branch of the library, just down the street from us. She was a playwright. She was a civil rights activist and a very compelling woman that I hope to learn more about. So from this remarkable woman to another remarkable woman, it is my pleasure to briefly introduce Miss Leigh Hallingby tonight. Leigh is a licensed New York City tour guide who specializes in Harlem, Morningside Heights, and the Upper West Side. She's passionate about exploring all 5 New York City boroughs and beyond on foot, mostly through organized walking tours. And like Regina, Leigh is also retired from a 36-year career as a nonprofit librarian. So librarians are amazing, they get things done. She loves doing research about the neighborhoods in which she gives tours and sharing the information about them with attendees. Leigh is a feminist, collector, genealogist, and lover of arts, culture, and travel. After residing in the suburbs of New York City for many years, she now loves living on the Upper West Side of Manhattan. Please join me in welcoming our special guest tonight, Leigh Hallingby.
Okay, thank you very much, Megan, for that lovely introduction. I'm gonna begin by sharing my slides. Let me just go. Okay, so thank you very much to the Morris-Jumel Mansion for inviting me to do this presentation during Women's History Month. Enjoyed working with Megan in setting this up. And I wish everybody happy St. Patrick's Day and happy Women's History Month. So thank you for coming with me on this feminist walk through Harlem to celebrate remarkable women. One of my favorite things about both African-American Harlem and Spanish Harlem is that it's part of the culture of both neighborhoods to honor notable people via murals and mosaics, statues, names of streets and buildings, plus plaques on the sidewalk. A large majority, like 70% of those honored are men, but we're going to be stopping at many of the places where the honorees are women. And just to be very clear, these are women who are celebrated in Harlem as opposed to women who actually lived there. So a few of these women lived in Harlem, and I actually don't know where a lot of them lived, but they're all celebrated in Harlem. And an advantage of doing this as a virtual tour is that we can visit both Central Harlem on the west side of Manhattan and then East Harlem, also known as Spanish Harlem. So I have created a handout that includes all the stops on the tour and a reading and watching list related to these women. So Megan is going to make that available to all the attendees after the program. So let's just start with a little geography. This is a map of northern Manhattan from 163rd Street down to 110th. The black arrow at the top shows where the Morris-Jumel Mansion is at 160th in Washington Heights. The vertical black arrow shows how Fifth Avenue divides the west side of Manhattan on the left from the east side on the right. Most of the area below the mansion is Harlem, and Harlem is so big that it's a neighborhood of neighborhoods. So we'll be walking through 2 of them, Central Harlem and Spanish Harlem. So the top orange arrow shows our first stop in Central Harlem at 135th Street. And the lower orange arrow shows where we end in Central Harlem at 114th. And on the right side of the map, we see where we enter Spanish Harlem, which is at 111th and Lexington Avenue. So you can see that I'm not covering tonight the area between the mansion and 135th Street. So within that area are two other Harlem neighborhoods, Hamilton Heights and Sugar Hill. But a number of the women I'm talking about do have ties to those two neighborhoods, and I will be mentioning when that is the case. So this is just the rest of the map of the area that we'll be exploring, showing where we end in Spanish Harlem at 100th Street and Lexington Avenue. So our first stop is the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, one of the most significant institutions in central Harlem. Since it's part of the New York Public Library, it's also known as the Schomburg Library. It's not a circulating library, but as the name says, a research library. So the main building there dates to 1980, and the lovely tan building on the left was the original neighborhood library, opened in 1904 and known as the 135th Street Branch Library. Today, that building is part of Schomburg, and they're actually connected architecturally. And we'll get back to that original building in a few minutes. So our first woman to celebrate is the Pulitzer and Nobel Prize winning writer, Toni Morrison. She was born in 1931 in Lorain, Ohio, and died on August 5th, 2019 in the Bronx. This is a bench by the road, which was placed in the courtyard of the Schomburg by the Toni Morrison Society in 2016. The Bench by the Road project was launched in February 2006 on the occasion of Ms. Morrison's 75th birthday. The name is taken from her remarks in a 1989 interview with World Magazine, where she spoke of the absence of historical markers that help remember the lives of enslaved Africans. She said, "There's no place you or I can go to think about or not think about, to summon the presences of or recollect the absences of slaves. There's no suitable memorial or wreath or plaque or wall or park or skyscraper lobby. There's no 300-foot tower. There's no small bench by the road." The goal of the Bench by the Road project is to address the lament that Toni Morrison expressed in her interview by placing benches and plaques at sites commemorating significant moments, individuals, and locations within the history of the African diaspora. Since 2006, the Toni Morrison Society has placed 20 benches, including this one at the Schomburg, at a variety of sites over a wide geographic area. So right outside the Schomburg, this block of West 136th Street was renamed Madam C.J. and Alelia Walker Place in 2019. It serves as a reminder of the former presence and lasting importance of this mother and daughter. Madam C.J. Walker was born Sarah Breedlove in 1867 in the Louisiana Delta to parents who had been enslaved. Young Sarah was orphaned at age 7, married at 14, and widowed at 20. Despite these hardships, she amazingly wanted to become the first Black woman millionaire. She became wealthy by creating hair care products and cosmetics for African American women, including an Indianapolis factory in 1910, or establishing an Indianapolis factory in 1910. Madam C.J. Walker was proud to offer profitable employment to African Americans who could work as commissioned sales agents, which was an important alternative to domestic employment. She earned renown for her business savvy and her philanthropy, through which she supported a wide variety of African American educational and social institutions. On the left is a famous photo of Madam C.J. Walker in her Ford Model T touring car in 1911. And on the right is a charming celebration of Madam C.J. Walker from the 125th Street subway station at Lenox Avenue. The title of the large mosaic from which this comes is Flying Home, Harlem Heroes and Heroines by Faith Ringgold. And one of the signature styles of Ms. Ringgold's art is portraying people flying through the air. So here we see a wonderful image of Madam Walker flying over her company while her iconic automobile is driving by. And one subject we could discuss during the Q&A is why Ms. Ringgold might portray African American people flying. What might be some of the symbolism of this? So since we're seeing her work a couple of times, I wanted to show photos of Faith Ringgold, a remarkable woman who is well worth celebrating in her own right. At age 90, she's one of our most important living American artists. Ms. Ringgold was born in Harlem and raised in Sugar Hill. So Aurelia Walker helped her mother found the C.J. Walker Manufacturing Company in 1905, and she opened its New York office and beauty salon in 1913. After Madam Walker's death in 1919, Aurelia became the company's president. She had an apartment in Hamilton Heights at 80 Edgecombe Avenue. So Madam Walker hired the first licensed African-American architect in New York State, Vertner Tandy, to combine two townhouses on West 136th Street into this lovely building. On the ground floor was an elegant beauty salon, and upstairs, Aurelia converted a floor of the home into another kind of salon known as the Dark Tower, a gathering place for luminaries and intellectuals during the Harlem Renaissance. This great outpouring of art and culture among African Americans can be dated from 1918 to the mid-1930s. So I want to note that this current time period is the 100th anniversary of the Harlem Renaissance. So I'm so sorry to say that this beautiful and historic building no longer exists. So the home and salon that Madam Walker and Aurelia Walker created, ironically, was torn down for the construction of the new neighborhood branch library. The 1904 building that we saw earlier, and that's pictured here on the left, had become too small. So the Walker home was lost in order for a new library, which is pictured on the right, to be built in 1941. A major reason this happened is that there were no landmark laws for preservationists to use then to attempt to save treasured buildings like the Walker home and salon. So a year ago, in celebration of Women's History Month, Netflix introduced Self-Made, inspired by the life of Madam C.J. Walker, starring Octavia Spencer as Madam Walker and Tiffany Haddish as her daughter, Aurelia. There are 4 episodes, and one of the creators is Madam Walker's great-great-granddaughter, Aurelia Bundles. So our next stop is the Harlem Walk of Fame, established in 1994 on West 135th Street. Currently, there are 17 plaques. Of these, 4 are women, which I've highlighted in bold type. 2 of the women are very familiar, and the other 2 are not so well known. So I'm going to talk about the ones that are not so well known, but I want to show you the plaques for Ella Fitzgerald and also for Billie Holiday. And I also want to show you other ways that Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday are celebrated in Harlem. So these are photos of parts of 2 mosaics where they both seem to be honored. The one on the left is part of a large mosaic in the 116th Street 2-3 subway station entitled Minton's Playhouse, Movers and Shakers. The artist says that the figures are composites. It's easy for me, and perhaps you too, to see this woman on the left as a composite of Ella Fitzgerald and Billie Holiday. She might look more like Ella, but she has Billie's trademark gardenias in her hair. The stunning mosaic on the right is above ground, right around the corner from the famous Apollo Theater. Entitled The Spirit of Harlem, it honors great musicians and dancers of the Harlem Renaissance. A New York Times article says that the woman singing is Ella, but there are the Billie Holiday gardenias in her hair again. So perhaps this image is also a composite. So Lois Alexander is the first of the 2 lesser known women I'm going to talk about. She was a fashion designer and founded the Harlem Institute of Fashion in 1966. The Institute was formed to interest African Americans in the garment industry and highlight their contributions to the trade. The Harlem Institute of Fashion gave free courses in dressmaking, millinery skills, and tailoring, as well as courses in English, math, and African American history. Ms. Alexander went on to found the Black Fashion Museum in 1979, originally established in Harlem on West 126th Street. The items in the large collection range from clothing and bonnets worn by enslaved people in the 1800s to a dress sewn by Rosa Parks, who was a seamstress at the time of her famous arrest in Montgomery, Alabama in 1955. And there are also gowns designed by another remarkable woman, Anne Lowe, pictured on the left. Her customers included Rockefellers, DuPonts, and most famously, Jacqueline Kennedy, whose wedding dress for her 1953 marriage to John F. Kennedy was both designed and sewn by Ms. Lowe. So eventually the Black Fashion Museum relocated to Washington, D.C., and the collection was donated by Lois Alexander's daughter to what is now the National Museum of African American History and Culture, which opened in 2016. So the other lesser known woman on the Harlem Walk of Fame is Vivian Robinson. While working in the advertising department of the Amsterdam News, the local community newspaper of West Harlem, Ms. Robinson noted that many small theater companies in Harlem were not being covered by the paper. So she volunteered to review their productions for the Amsterdam News. Then in 1973, she created Audelco, which stood for Audience Development Committee, to generate recognition, understanding, and awareness of the arts in Black communities and build new audiences for theaters and dance companies. Under Ms. Robinson's direction, Audelco also sponsored a series of Black theater festivals, and their award ceremony has become an annual event in the New York theater world. So now we come to a school and street corner named after Mary McLeod Bethune. She was an American educator, stateswoman, philanthropist, humanitarian, feminist, and civil rights activist. She founded the National Council for Negro Women in 1935. Ms. Bethune was president or leader of a myriad of African American women's organizations, including the National Association for Colored Women and the National Youth Administration's Negro Division. Ms. Bethune started a private school for African American students in Daytona Beach, Florida, which became Bethune-Cookman University. She was the sole Black woman who was officially part of the US delegation that created the United Nations Charter. For her lifetime of activism, Ms. Bethune was deemed the First Lady of the struggle. So she's also honored in Faith Ringgold's large subway mural, which means, of course, that Ms. Bethune too is flying. So here we see her with W.E.B. Du Bois, the founder of the NAACP, which he is flying over. And Ms. Bethune is flying over the National Council of Negro Women, which she founded. On the way to our next stop, we're passing by Sylvia's, which is definitively the most famous restaurant in Harlem and the place to go for soul food. Sylvia Presley Woods bought the restaurant where she was already working in 1962 and ran it for 50 years till her death in 2012. It's now owned and run by her children and grandchildren. So now we come to the iconic Apollo Theater on West 125th Street. Like the Morris-Jumel Mansion, it's a New York City landmark on both the exterior and the interior. Only about 120 interiors of New York City landmarks are, only 120 interiors in New York City are landmarked out of 31,000 total landmarked properties. So this is a very exclusive group of buildings that are landmarked both on the interior and the exterior that both the Apollo Theater and Morris-Jumel Mansion belong to. So Harlem's other Walk of Fame is located here. 25 artists are celebrated, and there's plenty of room for more to be added. 10 of those honored in the Apollo Theater Walk of Fame are women. I've put 9 of their plaques on this screen. And this is the 10th plaque, which shows how the Apollo Theater honored Aretha Franklin after her death on August 16th, 2018. So these are the women of the Apollo Theater Walk of Fame. Happily, 4 of them are with us today: Chaka Khan, Gladys Knight, Patti LaBelle, and Dionne Warwick. The only one I'm going to talk about now is the one woman on the list who's not a musician, and that is Jackie Moms Mabley. But if there are names here of other women whom you'd like to know more about, please ask me during the Q&A, as I do have information on all of them. So Jackie Moms Mabley was born in North Carolina. She went on to establish a 60-year career as a top stand-up comedian of her time. Her stage persona became a woman in a loose dress and floppy hat. She started as one of the most successful entertainers on the African-American vaudeville circuit. Later, Ms. Mabley starred in several films, became a headliner at the Apollo Theater, and in the 1960s had hit comedy albums. She was also a top draw for a number of TV variety shows, such as the Smothers Brothers, which introduced her to a whole new audience, the baby boomers. She became known as Moms because she was indeed a mom or mentor to many other comedians on the circuit in the 50s and 60s. Ms. Mabley came out as a lesbian at the age of 27, becoming one of the first openly gay comedians. She tackled topics too edgy for most mainstream comics of her time, including racism and homophobia. So I think, Megan, that this is where you wanted to pause and see if there are any questions so far.
Yes. So we actually, Fran in the chat was sharing, I had posed a question if anyone here had ever eaten at Sylvia's, and Fran shared, yes, I've eaten at Sylvia's, but anyone who knows Harlem knows that it is rivaled only by Mr. Charles, located at about 158th and Frederick Douglass Boulevard. So Leigh, have you ever been to Mr. Charles?
No, and I will add it to my to-do list. Thank you for telling me.
And then you were really highlighting sort of the discrepancy between the number of either historic sites or streets that are named for and celebrate women. And, I'm curious as to your input as to why that might be the case, or how might we go about rectifying that discrepancy?
Well, it's hard. I mean, obviously it reflects a whole social milieu and history in the United States, and in fact all over the world. And the Harlem community is not immune from the basic historic discrepancies and inequities between men and women. And so I guess the important thing is just to keep making sure that there are monuments and building names and street names that go up that recognize women. And sometimes people ask me if I have any ideas of other people who should be recognized. And I actually have a whole list I've developed. There's not really time to go through it now, but I think it's just a matter of thinking about important women who are associated with New York City. And some examples could be Lorraine Hansberry and Lena Horne. I was thinking somebody like Leontine Price, great African-American singer at the Metropolitan Opera. Audre Lorde, a great writer. Diane Carroll was raised in Harlem. Lena Horne was born and died in Harlem. So there are just lots more people who could be honored there.
Thank you. So please keep the questions and comments coming in the chat, and back to you, Leigh.
Okay, so now we come to the Harriet Tubman statue. I consider this stop to be the crown jewel of our tour. The title is Swing Low. The artist is Alison Saar, daughter of another great artist, Betty Saar. So there's a lot going on here, and we're going to stay for a few minutes. Born an enslaved person in 1822, Harriet Tubman managed against all odds to escape enslavement and help about 300 others escape. This, of course, was exceedingly difficult, given that enslaved people could not read or write, they had no maps or compasses, and there were men out on horses with dogs trying to catch fleeing enslaved people. Ms. Tubman is pictured here with her satchel as a conductor on the Underground Railroad. This, of course, was not an actual railroad, but a network of secret routes and safe houses for escaping to free northern states and to Canada with the aid of abolitionists and sympathetic allies. In her skirt are many images that elaborate the story. There are accoutrements of enslavement, such as a lock and chain. There are items you might use along the way as you are trying to escape, such as a bottle, a knife, and a pipe. There are faces of people whom she saved, and there is a shoe with a hole in it. At the bottom of the statue are scenes from Ms. Tubman's life, from her birth, seen here on the left, to her death, portrayed on the right. I'm going to highlight a few of the panels in between. On the left, we see Harriet Tubman as a young enslaved woman. She is chopping wood at night. In the upper left is the North Star, which she's gazing up at, thinking of escaping. One of the few ways that enslaved African Americans who were on the run could navigate was by following the North Star. In the right panel, before her escape, Ms. Tubman and the man she loves dance together under a starry sky, which even includes a comet. So here's Harriet Tubman getting married. Enslaved African Americans, of course, were not allowed to marry legally, so they developed a ceremony called jumping over the broom. In the right panel, Ms. Tubman is in fact fleeing with her pack on her back, and in the upper left, there is the North Star. On the left, Ms. Tubman is leading others to safety, and on the right, we see the chains of enslavement being broken. Although the Underground Railroad is a metaphor, the idea of an actual railroad plays out quite literally in two ways in this work of art. One is that Ms. Tubman is depicted here as moving forward so fast that she is pulling up enslavement and oppression by the roots as she rushes to help her people. Ms. Tubman is actually rushing forward with the speed of a locomotive. And the reason we know this is that Ms. Saar has actually turned her into a locomotive. Now we can see the front of Ms. Tubman's skirt has been made to resemble the grill, sometimes known as the cowcatcher, on the front of an old locomotive. The other reference to a railroad involves the placement of the statue. The grates on the left are part of the New York subway system. When one is visiting the statue, a train frequently passes underground and the whole site rumbles. And what is the New York subway system? It's an underground railroad. So on our way to our next stop, we're going to pass this street corner dedicated to Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis as of April 2019. Ms. Dee was raised in Harlem. Ruby Dee and Ossie Davis each had careers as activists and as actors that spanned many decades. So now we come to another statue of another woman who helped a great many people, Clara McBride Hale, who became known as Mother Hale. This beautiful Harlem brownstone on West 122nd Street was her home, which later became known as Hale House. In the 1940s, Mother Hale opened a daycare center in her home as a way to earn a living after she'd been widowed with 3 children. That led Mother Hale to become a foster mother who eventually took care of 40 foster children from 1947 to 1968. In 1969, in her mid-60s, Mother Hale began to take in children of addicted mothers. This is the work that brought her to the attention of the public. Ms. Hale eventually helped over 1,000 drug-addicted babies and young children. As if all this were not enough, she eventually expanded her mission to include children born with HIV or whose parents died of AIDS. But in 2008, 16 years after Mother Hale's death, Hale House closed, and the building is now privately owned. Fortunately, it's part of the beautiful Mount Morris Park Historic District and is thus protected by landmarking. So on our way to our next destination, we're going to pass by this condominium building, which is named after Rosa Parks. So now we come to another street renaming. It took place in 2018 near a building where Zora Neale Hurston lived at one time. She was born in Alabama and raised in Florida. Ms. Hurston, when she first arrived in New York City in 1925, lived in Sugar Hill and Hamilton Heights. And it's been pointed out that this woman of the Harlem Renaissance was also a Renaissance woman, as she was both an anthropologist and the most prolific woman writer of the Harlem Renaissance. Early in her career, she conducted anthropological and ethnographic research while a student at her alma mater of Barnard College and also at Columbia University, and eventually published these 2 anthropology studies. In addition, Ms. Hurston wrote more than 50 novels, short stories, plays, and essays concerned with both the African-American experience and her own struggles as an African-American woman. The most famous of her novels is Their Eyes Were Watching God, published in 1937. But her novels went relatively unrecognized by the literary world for decades. Interest was revived and has been sustained ever since March 1975, when the author Alice Walker published an article in Ms. Magazine entitled In Search of Zora Neale Hurston. So here's another delightful image from Faith Ringgold's Mosaic. Ms. Hurston is flying with 3 other great African-American writers. County Cullen to her left, Langston Hughes above him, and James Baldwin above her. And they're flying over the Schomburg Center for Research in Black Culture, where we stopped at the beginning of our walk. So before we leave Central Harlem, we're going to take a look at 2 more schools in Harlem named after remarkable women. So this is the Sojourner Truth School, named after this great American abolitionist and women's rights activist. Sojourner Truth was born into enslavement only 65 miles north of New York City in Ulster County in the Hudson Valley. She spent 30 years of her life as an enslaved woman from her birth in 1797 until New York State ended slavery on July 4th, 1827. Her best known speech was delivered extemporaneously in 1851 at the Ohio Women's Rights Convention in Akron. It became widely known during the Civil War era by the title, Ain't I a Woman, and includes such lines as, I can carry as much as any man and eat as much too, if I can get it. So if many of us have heard of Mary McLeod Bethune and Sojourner Truth, who the 2 previous schools we saw were named after, I doubt that too many of us have heard of Lydia Fowler Wadleigh. So she was a 19th century pioneer in the education of girls and women. In 1856, she established the 12th Street Advanced School for Girls in the face of what the New York Times referred to as bitter opposition at a time when public secondary education for girls was considered highly novel and maybe even scandalous. She was the school's first principal, and this lovely stained glass tribute to her is in the school we're about to look at, which is named after her. So this is the beautiful Wadleigh High School on West 114th Street, and it's been a New York City landmark since 1994. Later in her career, Ms. Wadleigh assisted Thomas Hunter in the creation of the New York Normal College and became its first superintendent. This was originally a college for training women teachers and became the important institution that we now know as Hunter College. So now we've made a quick transition to East Harlem, also known as Spanish Harlem, and we're looking at a beautiful mural of the famed Nuyorican writer Nicholasa Mohr, born in 1938. And she grew up in Spanish Harlem and the Bronx. Nuyorican is a mashup of New York and Puerto Rican and refers to the culture of the Puerto Rican diaspora in and around New York City. She became the first Latinx woman in modern times to have her literary works published by major commercial publishing houses and developed the longest career of any Latinx female as a creative writer for those publishing houses. Now we see two murals of Celia Cruz, who's also commemorated on the Apollo Theater Walk of Fame. The James de la Vega work on the left honors this Cuban-American singer who died in 2003, the year the mural was painted. So it's wonderful now to have a new mural of her painted in 2019 by Eleazar Lycia. Amor Cubano is the name of the restaurant, and La Vida es un Carnaval is a famous Celia Cruz song. The most popular Latin artist of the 20th century, she earned 23 gold medals and is a recipient of the National Medal of Arts. Billboard magazine says Cruz was undisputably the best known and most influential female figure in the history of Cuban and Latin music. She is renowned internationally as the Queen of Salsa. This beautiful mosaic honors Julia de Burgos. It has many wonderful details by Manny Vega and was unveiled in 2006 as a tribute to this Puerto Rican writer who was an advocate of Puerto Rican independence, a civil rights activist, and a literary foremother of the Nuyorican movement. She lived with depression and alcoholism in the latter part of her short life of 39 years. In July 1953, Ms. de Burgos collapsed on a sidewalk in Spanish Harlem, later dying of pneumonia in a hospital in Harlem. Since she was carrying no identification and no one claimed her body, the city of New York gave her a pauper's burial. Eventually, some of her friends and relatives found her grave and claimed her body. A committee was organized to have her remains transferred to Puerto Rico, where she was given a hero's funeral and burial. This beautiful building across the street from the mosaic is the Julia de Burgos Latinx Cultural Center. It's in Public School 72, which was closed in 1975 and is another New York City landmark. Julia de Burgos is the most honored person in Spanish Harlem. In addition to the mosaic, the Latinx Cultural Center, and the street named after her, there is this wonderful mural of her and the Mexican painter Frida Kahlo. This is Soldaderas by Yasmin Hernandez from 2011. Soldaderas were military women who participated in the Mexican Revolution from 1910 to 20. In addition to honoring these two women, the mural honors the common histories and struggles of two peoples, Mexicans and Puerto Ricans. Frida Kahlo and Julia de Burgos lived around the same time, but it's not known whether their paths actually ever crossed. So the inspiration for this murals is the two Fridas painting by Ms. Kahlo from 1939. She was the daughter of a father of European background and a mother of indigenous background. So we see Ms. Kahlo here in her white Victorian Western style dress on the left and her indigenous clothing on the right. And the two Fridas are holding hands and their hearts are connected by a common blood vessel. In Soldaderas, Frida, a Mexican, and Julia, a Puerto Rican, also sit together clasping hands in solidarity. In addition, each has a band of bullets crisscrossed on her chest. The women are thus portrayed both as soul sisters and as soldier sisters. Behind them, the Mexican and Puerto Rican flags share the central, red stripe. Miss Kahlo and Miss de Burgos shared a profound love for their respective homelands, appreciated and upheld revolutionary ideals, and embodied a feminist outlook.
So Leigh, if I could just jump in briefly, I would love it if you could take us out on Cicely Tyson, and that we could open up time for some audience Q&A. There's just so many fascinating women.
Okay,
we'll have to have you back.
This is a great place to end because, of course, we just lost this fabulous woman. So Ms. Tyson's family lived on East 101st Street in East Harlem from 1933 to 1941. So she was ages 9 to 17 at that point. So when she died on January 28th, 2021, at the age of 96, Ms. Tyson got a beautiful obituary on the front page of the New York Times. So I couldn't possibly improve on what they wrote, so I'm going to quote a bit of it. Her vivid portrayals of strong African-American women shattered racial stereotypes in the dramatic arts in the 1970s, propelling her to stardom and fame as an exemplar for civil rights. In a remarkable career of 7 decades, Ms. Tyson broke ground for serious Black actors by refusing to take parts that demeaned Black people. She urged Black colleagues to do the same and often went without work. So this is the pretty home that her family occupied on the 5th floor, as I said, from 1933 to 41. And according to the 1994 article that I've put there from the New York Times, the building was named for Ms. Tyson in 1994 when it was rehabilitated. When I photographed the building recently, whatever plaque there may have been to commemorate Cicely Tyson was no longer there. So one thing I think a lot of us learned from Ms. Tyson's obituary was that she helped Arthur Mitchell found the Dance Theater of Harlem in 1968 as a response to the assassination of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. They saw the dance theater as part of the beloved community that he had encouraged. Initially, the theater was supposed to be for only a school for Black dancers, but since many of them could not find work performing, the dance company was born. So this is going to be our last slide of the Dance Theater of Harlem, there on West 152nd Street, not far at all from the Morris-Jumel Mansion. It celebrated its 50th anniversary in 2018, the same year that Mr. Mitchell died. So both the Morris-Jumel Mansion and the Dance Theater of Harlem are part of an uptown arts and culture community. So thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to take you on a virtual tour of both Central Harlem and Spanish Harlem to celebrate remarkable women. So I really enjoyed showing you these places and telling you the stories of these wonderful people. So would this be a good time for me to stop sharing my slide?
Yes, that first of all, thank you so much for taking us on this inspirational virtual journey and sharing the stories of these incredible women with all of us. They're an inspiration to me, and people have been weighing in on the chat as well. There are, let's see, Janet, who is tuning in from further afield, said thank you to amazing guide Leigh. I can't wait to travel to resume, or for travel to resume, so that I can come to New York City and see all of this in person. And a few other individuals have questions about do you have any audio tours, and you know, do you foresee yourself providing virtual experiences in the interim, or eventually resuming your on-site?
I'd like to do both. I mean, of course, like everybody, I'm dying to be able to do all the things we used to be able to do out in the world, but it's really wonderful doing the virtual tours, because not everybody, for a variety of reasons, is able to go on an actual walking tour. And I think we've all been amazed, you know, when we tune in the New York area, to find people from California and Texas and, you know, all over the United States, and even, yeah, people from abroad. So to be able to share these sites and these histories with people from all over the country and the world is really a privilege. So I should mention the one other virtual tour I have is a tour of the Audubon Mural Project, which is right in the backyard of the Morris-Jumel Mansion. So if anybody's interested in that, either as a virtual tour or an actual tour, please let me know. That's kind of my signature tour, but I'm thrilled now to, this is a new tour that I just created, the Feminist walk through Harlem last year to celebrate the 100th anniversary of women's suffrage in 2020.
We've got additional people, asking where can we find the Audubon tour? So that is at the Audubon Mural Project. It's amp.org, right?
Well, yeah, you should probably get in touch with the mansion or me. So it's actually, their website is housed on the website of the National Audubon Society now. But, you know, if you put Audubon Mural Project into your search engine, you'll definitely find the project website. If you put Harlem Walks Tours into your website, you'll find, or into your search engine, you'll find my website and how to contact me about doing a tour in person or virtually of the Audubon Mural Project.
Yes, and after this program, each of you will be receiving a follow-up email containing a brief survey, as well as a link to Leigh's information and additional resources, including her stops on the Feminist tour of Harlem and recommended reading and watching list. So thank you very much for that, Leigh. I'm definitely going to delve into that. And then we will also send you, within that message, information on our next virtual parlor chat in the series. So I would, let's see. I posted in the chat if anyone had any women that they would like to see highlighted on the New York City streetscape. And Marguerite shared Alice Neal.
Yes.
Who has a show right now at the Met. And I believe Fran was sharing the Serena Williams, and also the singer and actor Vanessa Williams, and Professor Agnes Luard from Columbia University School of Social Work. Great suggestions. Helene agrees. She's like, Alice Neal would be great. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess that's part of the exciting thing in the work that you do now is, you know, the more that you are out and doing these sorts of presentations, more women come to your attention. And, you know, we are all able to learn.
Yeah, like I really just learned about Cicely Tyson's connection, as I said, to East Harlem because of her death and what was written about her in the obituaries.
Again, thank you so much, Leigh, and thank you so much to everyone in our audience this evening for joining us. Happy St. Patrick's Day and Women's History Month, even though every day is for women's history. And I hope all of you have a safe and wonderful evening. Be well.
Okay, thank you for being a wonderful audience for me. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Bye.